Order, order.
Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, Transfer of Functions, etc. Bill.
Welcome everybody. I call the Minister to move the resolution of the Programming Subcommittee. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Chope, and it's a pleasure to speak under you in your chairmanship role. I welcome the opportunity to further discuss and scrutinise the bill today following second reading, and I would like to thank the committee for their time and expertise. I'm also grateful to members of the other place who have already provided considerable scrutinies whilst also showing support for the bill. And I rise to speak to Group 1, which relates to clauses 1, 2 and 3 of the bill. Clauses 1 introduces Schedule 1, which transfers statutory functions from the Institute for Apprenticeships.
I think the Honourable Lady's got the wrong end of the stick on this one. I think she just needs to move the resolution of the Programming Subcommittee.
I beg to know.
Mr O'Brien.
Sir Christopher, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Should I now speak to clause 1 or to the programming motion?
Just to the resolution of the programme. You probably don't need to speak to
content with the programming motion.
Okay. The question is that the resolution of the programme subcommittee be made. Has many people say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The second motion is that we, on the evidence. Minister, do you want to move formally?
Formally moved.
Yes. The question is that the evidence be reported. Is that right? Yes.
Motion as on the order.
As on the order paper. As many people say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the substance of the bill, and we're going to discuss clause 1 stand part of the bill, and with that we're going to discuss Schedule 1 stand part, Clause 2 stand part, Schedule 2 stand part, Clause 3 stand part, and Schedule 3 stand apart. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Chope. I will begin again. I welcome the opportunity to further discuss and scrutinise the bill today following second reading, and I'd like to thank the committee for their time and expertise. I'm also grateful to members of the other place who have already provided considerable scrutiny whilst also showing their support for the bill. And I rise to speak to Group 1, which relates to clauses 1, 2 and 3 of the bill. Clause 1 introduces Schedule 1, which transfers statutory functions from the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education to the Secretary of State and makes minor and consequential amendments. It is our intention that functions currently delivered by IFE will largely be exercised by Skills England on behalf of the Secretary of State. These functions are in Chapter A1 of the Apprenticeship Skills, Children and Learning Act 2009 and include the duty to map occupational groups and the duty to approve and publish standards and apprenticeships assessments plans. Under the existing terms of the 2009 Act, the Secretary of State would also have the power to delegate functions to other persons, and we intend to establish Skills England as an executive agency of the Department of Education. Despite IFE's success in embedding employers into the processes for designing technical qualifications and apprenticeships, the wider skills systems remains too fragmented and complex. It is insufficiently responsive to the present and future skill needs of the economy, and we have major skill gaps. Employers report that more than 1/3 of UK vacancies in 2022 were due to skills shortages. To address this and unlock the potential for skills which drive growth and widen opportunity, we will create a new and more ambitious organisation, Skills England. Clause 1 will enable Skills England to take on and deliver functions currently delivered by IFE, giving it some of the key tools it needs to tackle these challenges as part of its wider remit. Skills England will provide an authoritative assessment of skills needed in the economy, use those data and insights to develop and maintain a comprehensive suite of technical qualifications and apprenticeships, using some of these functions transferred by this bill, and then work with key stakeholders to ensure that identified needs and available training is reflected in regions across the country. This will ensure that the systems become more responsive and better able to quickly and efficiently supply the skills most needed by the economy. Skills England will also work closely with the Industrial Strategy Council so that we have the skilled workforce needed to deliver a clear long-term plan for the future economy, and the Migration Advisory Committee to ensure that growing the domestic skills pipeline reduces our reliance on overseas workers. To summarise, Clause 1 will enable Skills England to take on and deliver functions currently held by IFATE where appropriate, alongside other functions. This will address the fragmentation which is holding the skills system back and restricting improved workforce development and productivity gains. Without this clause, it would not be possible to transfer functions from IFATE to the Secretary of State so that they can be exercised broadly by Skills England in the service of employers, learners and others. I now turn to Clause 2, which introduces Schedule 2, which makes provision for the transfer of IFATE's property, rights, liabilities to the Secretary of State. It will ensure functional continuity of property, rights and liabilities, including the many contracts that are critical to the operation of the skills system. A transfer scheme, which this clause makes possible, will mitigate risk of delay and a lack of service continuity, which is essential for a smooth transfer from IFATE to the Secretary of State, and the subsequent creation of Skills England. Without this clause, the coordination of the transfer of IFATE's properties, rights and liabilities to the Secretary of State will be less straightforward and would be more burdensome. Without a transfer scheme, each matter, including contracts and licences, would have to be considered and transferred individually, which would be more time-consuming and potentially impact value for money and the continuity of services in the delivery of skills products. This could mean a reduction in the quality of service received by employers, learners and others with an interest in the skills system. The transfer scheme, which this clause makes possible, will mitigate these risks of delay and a lack of service continuity, creating the minimum possible disruption for users of the system. I now turn to Clause 3, to abolish IFATE and introduces Schedule 3, which makes consequential amendments to existing primary legislation that are required as a consequence of abolishing IFATE. The clause is essentially for closing IFATE, so the government can establish and empower Skills England. Skills England will build on IFATE's work with employers in all sectors to shape technical education and apprenticeships.
I wonder if the Minister would give way.
Yep, I'm happy to give way.
I thank the Minister very much for giving way. I've had the pleasure of visiting some fantastic apprentices at Hertford Regional College's campus in Ware recently, and I know that the college there will be very excited about the prospect of Skills England. Could she say a little bit more about how soon we can expect Skills England to come forward?
Minister?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. It sounds like his college is absolutely doing excellent work, and obviously this bill is part of that process for Skills England to be delivered. It is our intention, following role assent of the bill, to make commencement regulations prompting to bring into force the provisions that transfer IFATE's functions along with the powers to transfer its assets and liabilities to the Secretary of State, and then the delivery of those services through Skills England. So, but Skills England will be very different from IFATE, as I've mentioned, bringing IFATE's functions together with others that are not currently in statute to identify skill needs and to work with regional partners to ensure that they are being met. It is by bringing together these different functions into a single organisation that we can make a more responsive skills system which acts fast on the evidence to address skills gaps uninterrupted by organisational boundaries, administrative hurdles and imperfect data flows. This would not be possible if these key functions were to be split across Skills England and IFATE. Clauses 1, 2 and 3 are essential to achieving this transformation, and I therefore commend the clauses to the committee and ask they stand as part of the bill.
Neil O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve on you. We have three main concerns about this bill, all of which are relevant under this grouping. First, there were good reasons why standard setting was put at arm's length and closer to employers. And as we heard from a number of sides of the House of Lords, this is a centralisation, and alongside other changes that the government are making, it will risk directly damaging the status of these qualifications. Second, the government is doing several things which will make it less likely that businesses will take on apprenticeships. But rather than fixing these problems, the government is reorganising. Skills England will be the 13th skills body in 50 years. It's abolishing IFATE in this legislation, which was created only 7 years ago. So it's yet more reorganisation rather than a focus on the real issues. And IFATE will now, under this legislation, follow a long list of predecessors, including the Manpower Services Commission, Learning and Skills Councils, the Skills Funding Agency, Skills Advisory Panels, the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, Training and Enterprise Councils, and more, into a lengthening history of skills acronyms. We have a bad history of institutional churn in this country generally, and particularly in this area. And third, we have real concerns that this reorganisation of the machinery of government will lead to harmful delays in addressing some of the most important strategic issues that we face. And in fact, these concerns are borne out by the government's own impact assessment. So the first three clauses here, as the Minister just said, are all about abolishing IFATE. Clause 1 introduces Schedule 1, which transfers functions from IFATE to the Secretary of State. It doesn't transfer them to Skills England, but it transfers them to the Secretary of State. And the words Secretary of State amazingly appear 90 times in this short bill. And that is one reason why this bill has come in for criticism from a number of different sides of politics. Instead of setting up Skills England as an independent body, which is what a lot of people, including within the Labour Party, assumed it would be, it's going to be part of the DFE. And its briefing on the bill, the Construction Industry Training Board noted that this was, and I quote, contrary to the previous characterisation of Skills England that was outlined in the King's Speech, and contrary to the vision of Skills England to be an independent body established in law with a cross-governmental role. And obviously those two things are linked. If it's going to be cross-governmental, it's more easy for it to be independent of the DFE rather than part of one department. So the CITB make an important point. IFATE existed to serve all employers, both public and private, and across every department. In contrast, Skills England will be firmly part of DFE. The CEO of Skills England has been announced will be a job share between the two civil servants who currently run the post-16 skills bit of the DFE. And likewise, the Institute of the Motor Industry, representing employers and professionals across the UK automotive sector, they say in their evidence to this committee that they have, quotes, significant concerns about the abolition of the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Institution and the transfer of its functions into Skills England. And they say that without dedicated attention... Yes, very happy to give way.
Did you note the submission from the Association of Colleges, which offered very strong support for the bill, and bearing in mind they represent a large proportion of providers of this education, I think their views should be taken into account.
I wondered if in that submission the Honourable Lady had noted their pretty strong criticisms of the government's decision to cut adult skills spending, and it's an example of what I was just talking about, which is instead of addressing the real issues, we have reorganisation. I wasn't going to bring up the Association of Colleges document, but I'm glad that the Honourable Lady has. But let me just continue to quote from what the Institute for the Motor Industry say. They say, without dedicated attention to the unique challenges faced by the automotive industry, Skills England risks creating further disconnection between education policy and real-world workforce demand. And they talk about the, and I quote, risk of losing employer-led standards. Transitioning to Skills England could introduce additional confusion and delays, undermining apprenticeship approvals and disrupting funding streams that are critical to maintaining employer confidence. And that is what the government's own impact assessment, in fairness, says. It says that the transition and the issues around that are likely to lead to delays, which will have a real-world impact. And I'll come back to that in a second. But all of these criticisms from different people in industry of the move away from independence and employer ownership, and those two things go hand in hand, they take us back to the kind of origin of IFATE, which was, of course, alongside the introduction of the apprenticeship levy. It was, in a sense, a quid pro quo. You had employers' money, and in return, you got employer ownership for the first time of the system. And the move away from something that's independent and properly arm's length into it being run by a bit of the DFE and by existing DFE officials is, of course, a bit of a move away from that sense of employer ownership. Absolutely.
I wonder if the Minister could explain why he doesn't think that the rationalisation of arm's length bodies, quangos, unelected, largely unaccountable, is a bad thing, and why the Secretary of State should not be the person who's held accountable for our post-16 skills education.
So it's
Yeah,
a perfectly good question. Of course, this government is a big fan of quangos, and I think has created net 28 more quangos since it's come into office, and they can be the right thing to do, so I'm not necessarily criticising the government for that. In this case, the reason why, I can't remember if the Honourable Lady was around when we were creating the apprenticeship levy, but the reason why IFIT was made independent of government and made as an employer-owned body was that we were for the first time creating something that's quite common in the rest of Europe with the apprenticeship levy, which is intended to stop good employers, as it were, to be very blunt, who invest in their own workforce and the skills of their own workforce, being taken advantage of by those who don't. And that meant doing something very controversial, which is effectively requiring them to pay into this levy. It's in many ways like a tax. But they could get their own money back through the apprenticeship levy. But in return for that quite big change and requiring larger employers to put their own money into skills, we wanted to ensure that the whole thing would be truly employer-led rather than politician-led. And while I think, of course, current ministers are brilliant. There's not any criticism of current ministers, but of course we legislate for the ages, not for whoever is currently the minister. And ministers change, and sometimes there have been instances, I'm horrified to tell the committee, where politicians have sometimes had foibles and funny ideas of their own which aren't necessarily reflected in the wishes of employers about what they want to see from the skills system. And that was why we put the system more into the hands of employers. But I think someone wanted me to give way.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. It's interesting to hear him speak about businesses' view of the apprenticeships levy. When I speak to businesses in my constituency in Bracknell, they tell me that the apprenticeships levy was not flexible enough and wasn't working and was preventing them giving opportunities to young people in my constituency, which is exactly why so many businesses have welcomed the changes this government is bringing in. Has he not heard the exact same from businesses in his constituency?
Yeah.
I've always heard from, even before we set it up, employers expressing concerns about the idea of a levy of any kind. They would, of course, in many instances, prefer to just keep their money, prefer to not spend it on skills at all. And the fact that they weren't doing that is the reason why we brought in a levy. Quite a contentious thing, quite a centrist thing in lots of ways. But as the Institute for Fiscal Studies has pointed out in their recent paper on the government's proposals to change the levy, the danger if you start to make these things too open-ended is that you completely collapse the concept. And they note what happened with things before, like train to gain, where what you end up with is pure deadweight. You get zero additionality. And if you, to reduce the idea to absurdity, if you were to just say employers can spend the apprenticeship levy on whatever they like, then there's no point in having a levy, is there, right? Because you've just gone around in a circle. There's no point taking money off people and just saying you can do whatever, just to finish the point, whatever you want. And the whole point of containing that expenditure to apprenticeships, as well as wanting to prioritise apprenticeships, was to avoid the very real problems that the Institute for Fiscal Studies pointed out with previous schemes like Train to Gain, where you ended up with huge amounts of deadweight and it didn't work, and the amount of money being spent on these things went down by employers. But I am absolutely ready to hear criticisms of and improvements to the idea of the levy. And in a moment I'm going to come on to talk about some of the challenges that are going to be thrown up by the government's proposals to move large amounts of money out of apprenticeships through the reforms to the levy. But I think there was a desire for me to give way from another honourable member.
Thank you. Just on your previous point, when I speak to businesses in my constituency of Stafford, Eccleshall and the Villages, one pointed out to me it's 90 pieces of paperwork required with multiple contract stages to get, for example, a plumber apprentice taking part in any sort of scheme. The college in my constituency, which is an outstanding college actually, and has a 72% completion rate compared to the national average, I think of 58, is, it's doing really strong work, but the businesses are saying, particularly SMEs, that the apprenticeship levy does not work for them and it's really excluded them from skills development. I'd be interested to hear what he has to say about that.
As I say, I'm absolutely ready to hear detailed thoughts and to have the detailed discussion about how one improves these, all of these different things, and I'm pleased that local college seems to be highly successful in delivering these things, and twice as many people started apprenticeships under the last government as did under the previous Labour government every year on average. So we did get a lot more of these things, as well as higher quality. But I'm absolutely ready to hear, I don't know what the 90 bits of paper are, but I'm absolutely ready to hear and to talk about ways that we could improve these things. And on the point about SMEs that the Honourable Lady raised, well, that is exactly why last March we moved to 100% funding for SMEs to make it easy for them. And I think that I actually agree with the Honourable Lady. There was a lot to do to make it easier for SMEs to participate in the levy-led system. I'm just not convinced that any of the things that she's raising as concerns at the moment are going to be addressed by shutting down IFE or indeed setting up Skills England. She might hope that they will be. I hope that they will be. I don't see that anything in this piece of legislation is going to fix any of the problems that she is currently complaining about. Though obviously, hopefully, collectively we will solve problems, and there are problems in the system. So, there are quite a lot of concerns, including among the Labour benches, which I'll come on to, about the transfer of IFE's powers to the Secretary of State in terms of compromising the independence with which apprenticeships and wider technical qualifications like T-levels are accredited, and in diluting the voice of employers. And as numerous people have pointed out, we would not, and we do not, accept this on the academic side, where you have both independent exam boards and Ofqual creating and monitoring both specifications and exams. I'm afraid this is yet again another example of us treating the academic side, which most of us went down, differently to the technical side. And as the Labour peer, Lord Knight, has pointed out, the problem some of us have with this bill is that it feels like the second half is missing. The second half is the establishment of Skills England as a statutory body. Being subsumed within a division of the Department for Education is problematic, and the Minister needs to reflect on it. And then as another Labour peer, Baroness Blower, pointed out, the appropriate move from where we are now would be to a statutory body. And Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute, has said giving Skills England legislative backing would cement the body's independence. In contrast, as originally introduced by the government, this bill did not even include the words Skills England. And so the very act of a further reorganisation, even if one thinks it's a good idea, is likely to further compound the effects of the budget and the decision to move apprenticeships money onto other things. And just to rehearse that for a moment. The budget, obviously, as well as the overall 40 billion tax increase, the largest part of that is in a 25 billion increase in national insurance, which is squarely targeted on part-time and lower income workers. And it hits exactly the kind of tier of the workforce that is typically the kind of the apprenticeship tier. Now, of course, apprenticeships don't pay national insurance, but where you have lots of employers, as you do now, shedding jobs in that kind of tier, that is inevitably bad for the number of apprenticeships, and that is then compounded by what the government wants to do in terms of taking money out of apprenticeships. And there's been some confusion about this, Mr. Chairman, because before the election, safely before the election, Labour in opposition had this idea that they were going to let employers take 50% of the money from the levy and spend it on things that were not apprenticeships. And then as the election drew nearer, that idea seemed to be rather disappearing, and it didn't feature anymore. A lot of people assumed it was gone. And then I further assumed it was definitely gone, because I asked the current minister, who we have here today, in Westminster Hall, whether the 50% target still stood. And the minister said that the policy was under review. But then a couple of weeks later, in orals, when we asked the Secretary of State whether the 50% target still stood, she said that it did, even though lots of people in the industry think that that is not the plan. So this whole thing about how much of the money is going to be taken out of apprenticeships and put elsewhere is shrouded in confusion. I would love it, be delighted if the Minister can talk to that point today and to tell us whether it is still 50% or whether it's not. I mean, it's not like a binary thing, it either is 50% or it's not. And I would love the Minister to tell us the answer one way or another, because at the moment, because the levy raises about 2 billion a year. If you take 50% of that money out, you might think it's a good thing. You might say, yes, I want employers to be able to spend £1 billion on other stuff. But if you take all that money out of apprenticeships, one thing you will definitely have is fewer apprenticeships. You can say, it's fine. I'm very happy to give way.
Shadow Minister references the numbers of apprenticeships, and he pointed to the previous government's record on that. But in my constituency, apprenticeship starts fell year on year under the previous government, and ended up with lots of young people being completely disenfranchised, having had their apprenticeships ended early, so they don't get to the completion rate. There has to be some kind of change so that we're not failing young people. There has to be a review of the levy, which employers have said is far too restrictive. So the points that he's making actually do not bear scrutiny when you get to constituency level data, do they?
I give the Honourable Lady the national level data, and I think I did already, that because I don't have in my head every constituency piece of data, but at the national level we had twice as many apprenticeship starts every year under the last Conservative government than we did under the previous Labour government. Now, the Honourable Lady might say that's not enough, it should have been even higher, and I perhaps would even agree with her, and I would have liked to have been even higher as well. And indeed, she said that they fell. What we saw was, even though the overall number of starts was twice as high under the Conservatives as it had been under Labour, absolutely the shift from frameworks to standards and to higher quality of apprenticeships did reduce numbers. Didn't take them down to where they'd been under Labour, but it did reduce them. But that was essential, that shift, and I don't think anyone wants to go back now from frameworks to standards. There was a damning report, which the Honourable Lady will remember well, from Ofsted in 2015, which found that there were quite a lot of people, quite a lot of learners, who had been on an apprenticeship for more than a year and didn't even know they were on an apprenticeship. Such was the low level of quality, such was the total absence of any training or meaningful content in the apprenticeship. What you had was an abuse. What you had was employers being able to pay below the national minimum wage, below the rates even for young people, and at the same time not provide meaningful training, not provide what all of us want to have, which is a proper high quality apprenticeships. I don't think the Honourable Lady is really going to argue for a move back to those previous frameworks. But as she rises to her feet, perhaps she will tell me if she does want to go backwards to frameworks.
That is not what I'm rising to my feet to say. What I am rising to my feet to say is that it's interesting that he points out the differential rates of pay between young people and old people, because we've just had the Employment Rights Bill going through Parliament when the members opposite were absolutely incandescent that we might seek to raise the pay of young people and equalise it and recognise fair rates of pay regardless of age. And I'm interested in the 2015 report. He said a lot of people. Was that the actual wording in the report?
I'm not sure what the question is. The Honourable Lady saying, is what I said about the 2015 report correct?
I was asking for the Shadow Minister to clarify the numbers. He refers to the report. He makes a sweeping generalisation about it. So what exactly were the numbers? What is the accuracy of the report?
Just to reassure the Honourable Lady, but the numbers are correct. And the Honourable Lady can Google, can use it. I don't encourage people to use mobile phones in committee, Mr. Chairman. The Honourable Lady can Google her way to the 2015 Ofsted report. She can read for herself and be chilled, as I am, by its description of the pre-reform system and the low level of quality that was being provided in that system. And the Honourable Lady tempts us off topic, Mr. Chairman. She tempts us to talk about wider issues. I would say on different rates for different people at different ages. Most systems around the world, including ours, have different rates of minimum wages by age, because what you do then is you make the bite of the so-called bite of the minimum wage similar for different ages. Different groups of people at different ages have different productivity levels, different typical rates of pay, and if you don't want to create large rates of youth unemployment, which most systems around the OECD don't, you end up with different minimum wage rates for different ages, which has been there since the start and was there when Labour created these things, and it was still there when we turned it into the national living wage. So none of that is novel. And one thing I would say about that piece of legislation, since it's been brought up, Mr. Chairman, we don't have the Skills Minister herself with us, because of course she is in another place, but I do just note that in that legislation, even though the government has created a situation of where there are a lot of universities facing industrial action because the national insurance increase has wiped out all of the increase in fees, and one broken promise on fees is now being used to pay for another broken promise on tax. Even though there's a lot of universities on the edge of industrial action, the bill that the Honourable Lady just referred to makes it easier to take industrial action, and I think a lot of universities as employers are dreading what the impact will be. But I will now come back on topic, having addressed that point. So I've mentioned some of the Labour peers and other bodies who have been raising concerns about the loss of independence, and I had started to talk about the double whammy of the budget and then the decision to take money out of apprenticeships, creating quite a big problem. But then that is potentially compounded by this piece of legislation we have in front of us. And the government's own impact assessment says that there may be a drop in apprenticeship starts while IFET's functions are transferred to the Secretary of State. And the impact assessment says, I quote from it directly, the transfer of function from IFET to the DFE could potentially cause a temporary slowdown in the growth rate of new apprenticeships and technical education courses due to potential delays in the approvals process resulting from the bill. It also says this may disproportionately impact disadvantaged learners who rely more heavily on these pathways for career advancement. So, as well as the two things the government are already doing which are not good for apprenticeship starts, this bill itself, again the government's own words, is likely to lead to delay and be bad for starts as well. And perhaps this is why, even though the government acknowledges that it has an internal forecast for the number of apprenticeship starts, it is refusing to publish that forecast, perhaps because it shows that what the government is doing is not going to be good for the number of apprenticeships. Perhaps there's another more innocent reason, Mr. Chairman, but either way we're not for some reason being allowed to see the numbers. We've had a bad habit of institutional churn in this country, and there is a real world cost to that. Baroness McGregor Smith, who's been the brilliant chair of IFET, in the Lords, quoted one of the board members of IFET, who noted very ruefully, his person is a very distinguished music producer, quote, it took 5 years to get employers on side and believe that IFET could really do good things, and here we are, starting all over again. And whenever you pull these things up by the roots, and you break all these relationships, you break all the trust, you change all the people around, you move loads of people, everyone's changing jobs, you do lose something whenever you pull these things up by the roots, and we've done it so often. And a lesson from previous institutional churn, not just in this field, in technical education or education, but more generally, is that the less securely founded on an independent basis and on a legislative basis a new institution is, the more likely it is that a new structure will itself be repealed or replaced in time, setting the stage for yet more churn. Now, Clause 2 covers the transfer of property and staff from IFET, and I quote, to the Secretary of State. Once again, it's to the Secretary of State, not to some new body that's external. And the challenge of managing that rapid transfer of staff into the department while trying to keep the engine running as best we can is one reason why peers voted for a 1-year delay to the abolition of IFET. And as Lord Blunkett said, Lord Blunkett knows this, former Education Secretary for Labour, my fear is that given the number of people currently transferable from IFET, which nudges 200, there is a real danger that IFET will swamp Skills England at birth. And he said, when, 2 years ago, I led on the Learning and Skills document, there was a precursor to Skills England. We never envisaged that an agency inside government would have to take on the assurance and accreditation of the relevant sector standards. And Lord Blunkett further noted that, quote, a Skills England that has no legislative backing and no parliamentary references, but is down merely to the changing face of ministerial and departmental appointments, is in danger of losing its birthright before it's even got off the ground. This is a Labour former Education Secretary with a great deal of experience, and he has seen that. He's been in politics for an awful long time, and he has seen this churn, and that is why he makes these warnings about the lack of legislative backing and the lack of institutional independence for Skills England, which in a sense is kind of his baby. It's something he worked on. And now Government Amendment 1, which we'll be coming on to later with Clause 11, seeks to overturn that short delay, only a short delay, that peers have put in to allow for a more orderly transition here, to allow Skills England within the department to at least get up and running before it attempts to also onboard 200 new colleagues. And I've seen machinery of government changes in many different places in government, and it does always cause disruption.
On that point,
Absolutely.
we acknowledge that an awful lot of preparatory work has gone on to establish Skills England already, and that once this bill goes through, we will be in a very good position to set this up quickly.
Existing at the moment, but it doesn't change the longer term point that if you don't give it its own legislative basis and you don't make it independent of the department, all these criticisms and concerns about the dilution of the employer voice and so on still stand. They're not having a go at those who are setting up Skills England. But very happy to give away on that point.
Just on the point of independence, thank you, specifically. The chair has been announced as Phil Smith, who's the former CEO of Cisco. Surely that in itself is a sign of significant independence.
Fantastic person, all good. It's like having Neds in a department, it's good to have external people. But as I noted, the CEO of the organisation is literally, it's not a civil servant, it's a job share civil servant. And they're people who currently work in the department doing post-16 skills. And so the idea that this is a sort of independent body, can the Honourable Lady tell me where Skills England is based? I wonder physically, where is it located? Perhaps the Minister will tell us. Is it in sanctuary buildings, by any chance? Is sanctuary buildings also none other than the headquarters of the DFE? Is this, in fact, a desk in an open plan office that is part of the DFE? So, look, you can bring in good people. It's a good thing to bring in good people. DFE has some good Neds, by the way. But that is not the same as having an independent institution. And that is why, Lord Blunkett, that is why other Labour peers are warning that the government is making a mistake here. It's their words, not ours. Lord Blunkett is someone who has a lot more experience of these things than I do. All I would say to the Minister and to honourable members opposite is, instead of overturning what peers have put in here, this might just be one of those times when it is more sensible to listen to people on their own side, people with some serious grey hairs and a lot of experience, people in their own party who are advising that they're making a mistake here, and instead of overturning what they've done, to allow it to stand. The criticisms that are being made by both people in industry and people with experience in education and skills are serious criticisms. I hope that the government will listen to them rather than simply try to overturn them and ignore them.
Ian Sullivan. Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Sir Christopher. And we are debating clauses Stamp Part 1 to 3 and Schedule Stamp Part 1 to 3. And the Minister in her opening remarks talked a lot about the intention to create Skills England, how Skills England would operate and so on. That is not in clauses 1 to 3 of this bill. This bill is all about transferring functions from the Independent Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education to the Secretary of State in central government. And colleagues may have seen the, as ever, helpful and pithy descriptive notes from the House of Commons Library. Clause 1 introduces Schedule 1, which would transfer statutory functions from the Institute to the Secretary of State. Clause 2 introduces Schedule 2, which would allow the Secretary of State to make schemes for the transfer of property, rights and liabilities from the Institute. Clause 3 would abolish the Institute and introduces Schedule 3, which would make consequential amendments to the 2009 Act and other acts. Now, Sir Christopher, the history of this sector is a history of many, many changes in the machinery of government and the creation of many, many quangos. There have been 12 in the last 5 decades. This will be, lucky no doubt, 13th. And my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, helped us with some of the history, some of those previous bodies. I have a slightly longer list. We have had industrial training boards, the Manpower Services Commission, the Training Commission, the Training and Enterprise Councils known as TECs. But those TECs were not the same as another type of TEC, the Technical Education Council, which existed along the Business Education Council, or BEC, in the 1970s. The two would merge in the 1980s to give us, of course, BTEC. There were national training organisations, the Learning and Skills Council, sector skills councils, the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, Skills Funding Agency, the SFA, which would later become the ESFA, and most recently LSIPs, Local Skills Improvement Partnerships, and IFATE. Are these bodies? I've missed one. Go on.
1563, the Statute of Artificers, known as the Statute of Apprenticeships. We've been trying to do this for many centuries, and it's only right that each generation tries to do that, and we're not getting it right for our young people, hence this need for speed.
Well, I'm very grateful to who knows where this conversation, Christopher, may take us. 1563, last time I looked, was not in the last is not in the last 5 decades, and she says every generation should try and reform. That may well be. I don't know how many generations she calculates there are in a 50-year period, but there sure as anything are not 12, let alone 13. Now, those many, many bodies over the years have been mirrored by a true panoply of qualifications and awards. There are traditional apprenticeships and modern apprenticeships. There was the YOP and the YTS. There was City and Guilds, TVEI, NCVQ, NVQs, which are still in use, GNVQs, which became BTECs and diplomas. There were 14 to 19 diplomas, which were not quite the same thing as the Tomlinson diplomas. There were Skills for Life, traineeships, and altogether between 100 and 200 recognised awarding organisations, excluding those who only do endpoint assessments. So today,
On that point,
I've not forgotten another, have I? Go on.
well, I simply wish to say to the member, and I thank him for giving way, there was not too long ago when he was on this side of the House and was presiding over this very system, in question. And as I think he has helpfully elucidated for everyone, we are dealing with an incredibly fractured landscape, which is precisely the challenge this bill is proposing to address. So I say to him, in all frankness, given the fractured nature of the landscape he has himself very eloquently identified, should he not be supporting any attempt to bring that fractured landscape together?
Yes, but it isn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. And if he thinks it does, I'm afraid he is mistaken. So some years ago, he's right, I did used to sit on that side of this room. And some years ago, I was a minister at the Department for Education, and for many other occasions I've had a close interest in these areas. There was a coming together, a cross-party coming together in the early to mid-2010s, which resulted in a thing called the Sainsbury Report. Now, the noble Lord Sainsbury, as he may know, is a Labour peer who has devoted a great deal of his life and his foundation, the Gatsby Foundation, to trying to improve something that in this country historically we have not been tremendously good at by international comparison, that is technical and vocational education and training. And so the independent panel on technical education, which convened in 2015 to 16, took a very broad overview of exactly that fractured landscape that he talks about. By the way, I've missed out the page where I went through all the qualifications you could do at level 3 to age 18 today, which is another similarly sized list. That I think he'd better let me go on a little bit, but I do promise to. I'd love to hear from him, and I do promise that the committee will have a chance so to do. That panel found, unsurprisingly, that the technical and vocational education and training landscape in this country was over-complex. With the example given of plumbing, 33 different qualifications that a young person might decide to do. Moreover, it found that the system was not providing for the skills that the country needed, and that the education and training of technical and vocational had become, and I quote, divorced from the occupations that they were there to serve, with no or weak requirements to meet employers' actual needs. And so in its report, with the Sainsbury Report, which was in April 2016, it set out a blueprint for what would be a major upgrade and simplification of technical and vocational education and training. To address the productivity gap in this country, which, by the way, we talk about this sometimes politically, there's been a productivity in this gap every year since I've been alive, and I'm in my mid-50s today. To address both the productivity gap and, indeed, a major social justice gap. And as I say, although it was a blueprint, it was also a red print, because it had cross-party support. It called for a fundamental shift in how we did technical and vocational, with a coherent routeways from levels 2 through to level 5, along 15 different sector routes, 3 of which would be apprenticeship only, through 35 different pathways mapped to specific occupations, specific needs of the economy and companies. So for the 3 that weren't apprenticeship only, there would be both an apprenticeship track and a college track, but there would be critically common standards for both, with the same or equivalent knowledge, skills and behaviours. And it wasn't trying to merge academic and vocational. And by the way, leading systems in the world, those that everybody else looks up to for the quality of their vocational systems, they do not merge the two. They have them as separate, but just as exacting, just as high quality, whichever of the 2 routes that you go down. Now, why is this relevant to today's debate, Sir Christopher? It is because IFATE, the independent institute for apprenticeships and technical education, was central to this vision. It built on the existing IFA, Institute for Apprenticeships, to combine that with the college route, and to ensure that employers had a central role in setting these standards, skills and behaviours that people would need. And the Sainsbury report was clear that specifying standards is not a role for officials in central government, but for professionals working within the relevant occupations supported by education professionals.
Will you give way at that point?
I must give way, obviously, to the Shadow Minister, but then I will give way to him.
Firstly, can I also pay tribute to the work of Lord Sainsbury on all these things? But does my honourable friend agree that those points inserted into what were then called the Sainsbury routes were drawing on the experience of the best technical systems in the world, particularly Germany, particularly Switzerland? And what characterises those systems? Unbelievable level of employer ownership of the system and incredible constancy of the organisations which are external to government running them. So the BIBB has been around for, I think, 50 or 60 years now. Aren't those the characteristics of a good system? Aren't the employer ownership and the independence? And aren't they the things that Sainsbury was talking about?
Well, look, of course it's quite right. And in fact, you can, if you take the full kind of etymology, if you like, you can go back a lot further than that, to the creation of guilds centuries ago, which then have evolved into the modern system. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank him for giving way. I've enjoyed his recapitulation of the history. In the last Parliament, I attended meetings of the UK Shipbuilding Skills Task Force, which was sponsored by the Department for Education, and considered these matters in respect of that industry quite closely. Employers and employee representatives were unanimous that the GCSE entry standard requirement should be removed within that industry. But the inclusion of that recommendation was blocked. We were given to understand because it would not be supported by DFE ministers. Does he share my concern that the independence of the current system is more claimed than real?
No, I don't. But there is a definition of what an apprenticeship is. And there are perfectly good reasons to have all manner of training courses, including entry-level training courses, which do important things, but they are not apprenticeships. And we were just talking with the Shadow Minister about Germany. Already in our country, the typical length of an apprenticeship, or the minimum length of an apprenticeship, is shorter than the typical length in, say, Germany. The time off the job time in college is shorter. And as I say, you can add on other things, but you can't stretch the definition of what is an apprenticeship indefinitely, and I may come back to that later in my remarks. So, Christopher, on the face of it, this is a simple bill. There are 13 pages. It's a single subject, a couple of Thursdays. Should be fairly easy for a committee to dispatch. And I've no doubt that colleagues opposite will take the opportunity to make speeches on this subject. I'm sure they will make rather good speeches. They may make what could really be described as great speeches. They will be largely unarguable in what they say. I fancy, Sir Christopher, that we may hear the word mission, perhaps even more than once, from the members opposite. They will talk about the importance of skills in our economy. They will talk about investing in the next generation and valuing every single person for what they can do. They will talk about the value of joining up across government departments. And that will all be correct, and it will be largely beside the point. To turn a great speech saying those things into a truly outstanding speech in this committee, they would have to explain why taking away the independence of the body that oversees the system, that upholds the standards, why removing that independence would make those entirely laudable and shared goals more likely to come about. I know of no reason to believe that it will, but I'm very keen to hear from anybody who has such an idea. Now, in the Labour manifesto, there are some very, again, laudable aims. It said it wants to empower local communities to develop the skills people need, put employers at the heart of our skills system, establish Skills England to bring together business, training providers and unions with national and local government to deliver Labour's industrial strategy. Skills England will formally work with the Migration Advisory Committee to make sure training in England accounts for the overall needs of the labour market. Or devolve adult skills funding to combined authorities alongside a greater role in supporting people into work. And they're going to transform further education colleges into specialist technical education colleges. Now, there are different ways that you could achieve those aims. And I would argue, Chris, that there are better ways that you could achieve those aims. You could, for example, keep IFATE as the standard setting and upholding body, create a new body, a small body, possibly inside the Treasury, to assess the needs of the economy and to allocate funds accordingly, and strengthen the powers of local skills improvement partnerships, working closely with devolved authorities and with mayors to ensure that what's delivered at a local level in individual colleges matches what the local economy needs. Now, that is the architecture probably I would have chosen, but there are plenty of other variations possible. To be clear, this bill doesn't do any of those things. It simply abolishes the independent body that convenes employers to set the standards and then uphold them. And it hands those powers to the Secretary of State, nothing else. I say nothing else. It's actually not totally clear to me what it does to Ofqual, but we may debate that when we get to Clause 8. I suggest, Sir Christopher, that this bill presents two fundamental questions. Firstly, about independence, and secondly, about who should set the expectations, the standards in any given sector of work. Should it be the employers in that sector or anybody else? And we will come to that debate when we reach clauses 4 and 5. Ultimately, this is about whether we actually believe enough in the phrase parity of steam to do the things necessary to achieve it. Because, as I said in the Commons the other day, with parity of esteem, that is not something you can just assert. And you certainly can't legislate for it. You can't pass a law to give something greater esteem. Esteem is in the eye of the esteemer, and it can only be earned. And in part, that comes from knowing that the qualifications in the technical and vocational strand in our country are just as rigorous and have the same integrity as the academic. Now, this is not, the thing about independence isn't, by the way, totally a left-right thing. There are plenty of people on the right in politics who share the minister's desire not to have independent bodies, and there's a general sort of anti-the Quangos strand. And I have some sympathy, by the way, there's a debate, I think, going on at the moment about removing the independence of the National Health Service, bringing it into the DHSC. I think you can argue that both ways. On the one hand, it will be harder for the NHS to do some things, particularly when they're trying to what they call reconfigurations, when they become subject to political pressure. On the other hand, you can argue that, of course, the most important institution in our country, of course, there should be direct control of a democratically elected government over it. But an independent body for upholding standards in education, I think, is in a separate bracket.
Will you give way?
I will give way.
I wonder if you'd agree with this. The context in which this is happening matters, as well as getting rid of a prestigious and independent institution. At the same time, T-levels are not going to be doing what Lord Sainsbury hoped they would do. They're supposed to replace existing standards.
Yeah.
In fact, they're going to be just another thing in the alphabet soup. And we're seeing apprenticeships being made shorter again. We're going back towards shelf-stacking type of apprenticeships. So already the mood music is pretty ominous, and it's against that backdrop that ministers are taking more power, just taking it back into the department and abolishing the independence. My honourable friend agree that that's a bit of an issue.
Well, I do, and funnily enough, he anticipates my next paragraph. Look, any government rightly wants more young people to be passing their GCSEs, wants more young people to be getting good A-levels, or indeed to be starting and completing an apprenticeship. And the truth is, for any qualification, the quickest way to have more people getting it is to make it a little bit easier. And there is plenty of history of that, I'm afraid, in the past. You can reduce the entry requirements, you can reduce the length, you can make the pass mark a bit lower, you can change the credits that count towards the outcome. And one of the reasons we have independent bodies setting standards is so that temptation cannot be succumbed to. And crucially, everybody can see that temptation cannot be succumbed to, so they can have total faith in the upholding of those standards. So essentially, the rationale for why you have an independent institute for apprenticeships and technical education is the same rationale as why the Chancellor sets fiscal rules, or why Gordon Brown made the Bank of England independent. It's specifically to keep yourself, as the government, within certain tramlines. And of course we do it, don't we? We do it for academic qualifications. I've asked the Minister this, I think, 3 times now, and I'll ask it again today. It wouldn't be acceptable, would it, to say I'm going to set the pass mark, the standards, the specifications for A-levels in the hands of a government minister. So if it's not acceptable for A-levels, how can it possibly be acceptable for T-levels, and we still say we believe in parity of esteem? Now, in those speeches that I mentioned, the good, possibly great speeches that we will hear from colleagues opposite, there's one other thing they may say. In fact, they've already started to say it. They preempted me. They will say that apprenticeship starts have fallen since the peak, but that under this government, they will rise. Well, Sir Christopher, yes, of course they will rise. Now, if you're looking at the time series over the last decade of apprenticeship starts, you are not comparing apples with apples. You are comparing apples with oranges. Because we had major changes in what counts as an apprenticeship, with the move from frameworks to standards, the minimum duration and the minimum time off the job. And in discussing the overall numbers, by the way, we ought also to mention that the falls were in the intermediate level, and there were rises in the advanced level and especially the higher level apprenticeships. And of course, if you reduce the specification in some way, of course that's going to increase the numbers. And to be fair, they're not waiting for this thing, Skills England. They've already been doing it, bringing the minimum length down from 12 months to 8 months, and also having announced what they're calling foundation apprenticeships. And I hope the Minister in her remarks will be able to tell us if foundation apprenticeships, well, first of all, what exactly they are. They sound a little bit like traineeships, but let's hear it. But crucially, will they count towards the number of apprenticeships that are being undertaken in the country? So At the heart of this question, I think, is independence. But then there is a secondary question. So if you're not going to be fully independent, if you're going to be part of the government, what's the next best thing? And if you want a body like this to work across Whitehall, linking up the industrial strategy, immigration, and doubtless a number of missions, you have to think where that's going to be most possible. Now, I love the Department for Education. I don't want to get all sentimental with everybody here. I truly do. I think it's a wonderful department. I love the people that work there. I have loved the opportunity myself to work there. But I have to tell you, with the best will in the world, if you want to get something done across government, you can't do it from a department like the DFE. There's really only 3 places you can do it from. That's number 10, the Cabinet Office, and most especially the Treasury, because those are the parts of government known as the centre, which have leverage over the other parts of the government to get things done. And so if you're not going to have Skills England as a truly independent body, I would argue it is better placed in the Treasury or the Cabinet Office. Now, IFATE is legally established today as a non-departmental public body, whereas Skills England, we are told, will be an executive agency. Now, as a non-departmental public body, IFATE does have some independence from the DFE because its functions and responsibilities have been set out in legislation, and that legislation has been approved by this Parliament. Skills England will instead be a team within the Department for Education. Its functions and responsibilities are not laid out in this piece of legislation, and to the best of my knowledge, will never be laid out in legislation that will be approved by this Parliament. IFATE today decides how occupational standards and apprenticeships assessment plans get developed and approves them. It manages the licensing of awarding bodies for T-levels, and it commissions development of technical qualifications and approves higher technical qualifications. Now, at the time of the King's speech, number 10 said that and I quote, a Skills England bill will transfer functions from IFATE to Skills England, suggesting that Skills England would have a statutory footing of its own. But this bill transfers powers from IFATE and abolishes it, and moves all those functions simply to the Secretary of State. There are now 2 mentions, grand total, how many did you say? 90 there were, Secretary of State. There are now a grand total of 2 mentions of Skills England in this bill, but both of them we have our friends in the other place to thank for. Originally, Skills England didn't warrant a mention in this bill at all. It now appears in clauses 9 and 12 thanks to amendments in the other place. And we will come in time in this committee to Lord's Amendment number 7, which is now in the guise of clause 9 in the bill text. And no doubt the Minister will say, well, this sets out everything you need to know about Skills England. In fact, that is only a requirement for a report to be made about what functions will be exercised, not a statement in the legislation of what those functions will be. It is legislation to tell us at some point in the future what you intend to do. And the title of that new section is itself telling, because the title is a report on the Secretary of State's functions. They are not Skills England's functions. It just says, well, the Secretary of State can tell us which of her functions she can decide to give on to another body, in this case, Skills England. But we need to bear in mind, we're legislating here. This will be primary legislation, an act of Parliament. It's not there for the duration of one Secretary of State at the DFE or even one government. It will be the law of the land. And this Secretary or any future Secretary of State could simply change their mind about what the role of Skills England should be. So, Sir Christopher, I'm afraid I do have very grave reservations about what the government seeks to do. Actually, what they really ultimately seek to do, as with so many things we talk about in these committee rooms, but there's a lot of commonality in what we'd like to see. We'd like to see every individual in our country be able to absolutely fulfil their potential. We want growth in the economy, we want productivity gains. But I have serious doubts that this new, not even a quango, is the way to get. Minister.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. You have, honourable members have given me much to think about and to feed back on indeed. But I would like to begin by just reminding there are members opposite, that 1 in 8 young people are neat. A third of vacancies in our country are due to a lack of skills, and there are many people in jobs where they are underqualified. Young people need to know that when they are undertaking training and skills, there will be a guaranteed job at the end of it. We are committed for growth in this country. We want to get young people into jobs, into work, making sure that they are succeeding and progressing in life. We absolutely know that Skills England and this, what we're trying to achieve here, is the right thing to do. Now, I will attempt to respond to the various points that have been made. And I will begin by saying that there have been previous arm's length bodies with functions that are partially linked to those intended for Skills England. However, none provide a direct comparison given Skills England's distinct remit. Establishing Skills England is a manifesto commitment and will support delivery of the government's missions. It's absolutely our aim. And as an executive agency, Skills England will be subject to clear requirements on governance, transparency and accountability, and ministers will be accountable to Parliament. The government has put on the face of the bill a duty for the Secretary of State to publish information about matters it will take into account when deciding whether to prepare a standard or apprenticeship assessment plan without a group of persons. This new power will therefore be subject to the same level of transparency as existing powers being transferred from IFATE. Now, an executive agency is a widely used model of arm's length bodies, which has a clearly defined status and must be established and governed in line with official Cabinet Office guidance. They are appropriate for the delivery of specialised functions separate from a primary policy-focused department, but within a policy and resources framework set by the department, and delivery of services to the other parts of the central government using specialist skills. The executive agency model provides Skills England with the independence to focus on the delivery of its functions at an arm's length from the Department of Education, while also ensuring sufficient proximity to the department so that Skills England can quickly and efficiently inform decisions on skills and indeed policy delivery. Now, in terms of where Skills England is based, well, Skills England is in shadow form. And I'd like to point out that IFATE also currently has a base in Sanctuary Buildings, which is the Department of Education. And with Skills England being based in shadow form, also working extremely closely with IFATE is also at Sanctuary Buildings. Now, following a vigorous recruitment process in line with civil service guidance, we have appointed Skills England's CEO. Teresa Griffin and Sarah McLean have been appointed as co-CEOs of Skills England, two senior leaders with long-standing experience in the public sector. Tessa and Sarah have been leading Skills England while it's been in shadow form since last summer. They have driven the rapid progress that has seen Skills England start to deliver its important work ahead of the passing of this bill. We do not believe in delay. We want to get on with it. And it's established as an arm's length body. Skills England being run by a CEO at Civil Service Director level is consistent with the approach taken by IFATE and indeed with other executive agencies of the Department for Education. And it's really important that I make those points so that there's a clear understanding of what is happening here. So, as I continue, we considered but ultimately decided against expanding or otherwise retaining IFATE. We want to set Skills England up to build on IFATE's work with employers, to shape technical education and apprenticeships. But Skills England will be very different from IFATE. It will have a much broader remit. It will be more ambitious, bringing IFATE's functions together with others that are not currently in statute. We need to go further and we need to do more. to identify skills needs and to work with regional partners to ensure that they are being met. It is by bringing together these different functions into a single organisation that we will really be able to accelerate change, helping the skills system to be more responsive to emerging skills needs. We need a flexible system, an acting fast system on the best available evidence to address the skills gaps which threaten to hold back our country. And I'm sure none of us want to do that. I8 has worked with employers to design over 700 occupational standards. Skills England will build on that important work and retain a strong role for employers. But the skills system in England has matured since I8 was created in 2017. And the scale and the urgency of the skills challenge means that we must face this and we need a new approach. Now, this government is committed to delivering the skills for this sector, as I've already pointed out, and we are listening to the needs of employers, and this can be seen in our reform, growth and skills offer. Skills England will build on the work of I8, and employers will continue to play a critical role in the design and in the delivery of apprenticeships and technical education. Indeed, this is already happening. The changes being brought about through this bill have been designed in response to employer feedback and will simply mean that employers are not overburdened by repetitive and drawn-out processes, which we know can lead to disengagement. So, I would also like to point out that I welcome the written submissions from the Institute of the Motor Industry, the Association of Colleges, JTL Training and the Royal Society of Chemistry, and thank these organisations for contributing to this important debate. I completely agree with the Institute of the Motor Industry's view that Skills England must maintain an employer-led ethos with strong industry collaboration. This is why Skills England is already and will continue to work closely with industry, whilst also building a clear picture of the challenges facing employers, including regional skills gaps, in order to support growth in our skills sector. It is pleasing to hear that the Association of Colleges, which represents more than 98% of further education colleges, express strong support plans to establish Skills England and recognises the critical role Skills England will play in the government's broader post-16 education and skills agenda. Now, I move to refer and respond to the amendment in the House of Lords. Now, despite many members of the Abba Place supporting the aims of Skills England, I mean the Abba Place when I said that, it is disappointing that the peers voted for a delay to its full establishment. The government is clear that employers need a fully formed Skills England now. They cannot wait, and this is why we are tabling an amendment to overturn this amendment. Since gaps in our economy are holding back growth and opportunity, we need this bill to give Skills England some of the key tools it needs to tackle them now and not in 12 months' time. Skills England has been operating in shadow form since July, as I've already said last year, due to extensive transition planning over several months. It is ready to move fast to deliver the functions made possible through this bill, and delay is simply not an option. Now, with regards to whether employees can spend up to 50% of levy funds on non-apprenticeships training, I don't want to put a target or limit on flexibility. This will be led by what employers need, driven by Skills England analysis. We have already introduced flexibility through new foundation and shorter apprenticeships, and will continue to work with employers to understand where future flexibility will be most helpful. We are not...
I'm very grateful for the Honourable Lady giving way on this point. She says she didn't want to set a limit, but there was a commitment from the Secretary of State that employers would be able to take 50% of their funds and spend them on non-apprenticeships. That was a Labour commitment. So there was a commitment that you'd be able to do up to 50%. If I'm understanding the Honourable Lady correctly, it will no longer be up to 50%. It will be some other number. Or is she saying that it will be up to 100%? Which of those is she saying?
So what I am saying is that we've already introduced flexibility through this, and we will continue to work with employers to understand where future flexibility will be most helpful. This will be worked through with Skills England, and I'm happy to get into further information on this.
Will she give way on that point?
I think I've made
No, I just,
I've said
we
enough
should
on
give
that
way.
part. No, thank you.
No, I was just left completely unclear about it.
Well, if the minister's not giving way, that's
No, we'll return to that.
and obviously, as the honourable gentleman knows, in a committee, people can speak more than once on a particular. So if the shadow minister wishes to come back after the minister sat down, then he's free to do so. Minister.
We are not centralising regulation of technical qualifications akin to IFE. Skills England will operate independently from the Department of Education and will continue to work with IFE and have to develop occupational standards. Skills England will have a new and transformative role in the skills system and work closely with, but not duplicate the role of the department or regulators such as Ofqual and the Office for Students. Ofqual is an independent expert regulator of qualifications and assessments for England and makes judgments about the quality of qualifications, be they technical or academic. Ofqual already provides some regulatory oversight of technical qualifications to secure standards of all qualifications and will also play a key role in reviewing assessment materials ahead of approval. For technical qualifications, we are introducing the possibility that Ofqual can accredit technical qualifications in the same way it is able to currently do so for academic qualifications. Now, there are no redundancies planned for IFE staff. Trade unions have been fully consulted on the processes for ensuring there is a smooth transition for staff out of IFE and will continue to be engaged. IFE currently occupies sites in London and Coventry and is co-located with the Department for Education at several sites, as I've already alluded to. And this is around the country on a fair use basis. We expect IFE's property licences to be transferred to the Department of Education at the point it is abolished, and decisions on precisely where Skills England staff will be located will be taken in line with the wider government estate strategy and places for growth principles. Across all of its offices, Skills England will forge close relationships with partners up and down the country. So as I move on to talk about the planning, detailed transition planning has already taken place to ensure the functions moving into Skills England from IFE will transfer smoothly, with no breaks in service. We have an agreed approach to the continued delivery of technical qualification apprenticeships, and the implications for contracts, assets and liabilities have all been worked through. Therefore, there is an attempt to make this as seamless as possible. The planning continuity in staffing and team structures will ensure that occupational standards, apprenticeships and wider technical qualifications will continue to be approved, and T-level contracts will continue to be delivered, supported and monitored. This approach will also ensure that Skills England maintains the vital links with employers and other partners that IFE teams have previously established. So these insights will continue to inform the apprenticeships and technical qualifications that are needed now and in the future. This work will be significantly enhanced by the closer links that will be created by the analytical and regional functions of new organisations. And on that point, Sir Christopher, I urge the committee to support clauses 1, 2 and 3 and schedules 1, 2 and 3 stand part of the bill.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. But we have mysteries wrapped in mysteries here, as well as the lack of clarity about the future caused by this bill. We've had, even just in one exchange in this debate on one set of clauses, an extraordinary statement from the Minister. Businesses would like to know how, in just a few months' time, next year, how they will be able to spend a couple of £1 billion of their own money. Their own money. This is employers' money. There's billions of pounds, right? And the government has oscillated between, we will let 50% of this go on other things. No, we will not. And then, since being in government, we are reviewing this. This is not our policy anymore. No, absolutely. On the floor of the House, the Secretary of State saying, no, absolutely our policy. 50%, that's the number. And that's what she has told the House. And now, a fifth position on the spending of this money. No, that's not the number anymore. Employers will be jaw to the floor, agog at what is going on within DfE here. right? What is the policy? This is billions of pounds being spent imminently, employers' money, in a difficult economic situation, and yet the DfE cannot answer. In fact, the Minister literally would not take a further question on it. What the policy is. What an extraordinary situation. What a shameful situation. Unbelievable. So, the context of us making this transfer of power away from an employer-led system, away from an independent system, towards the tender mercies of the DfE, we've been saying there might be, down the line, some things to worry about in that situation. Employers have got something to worry about right now. The government doesn't seem to know what its own policies are. On that basis, I really do want to put Clause 1 stand part to the vote, and we will be voting against it.
Minister, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Minister.
We've been listening to businesses and employers, and they are absolutely telling us that they want greater flexibility in our apprenticeship systems and in how employers do spend their levy funds. And we're reforming apprenticeships to deliver greater flexibility for learners and employees, including through shorter, as I've said, and foundation apprenticeships. I have attempted to answer his question, and he is not satisfied. I've also offered to make sure that we can get some more information. But I just want to say on one more point that we are not putting a target or limit on flexibility.
No,
This will be led by what employers need. I will give way.
I'm very grateful for the Minister to give way. I'm not asking for a target. That is a complete mischaracterisation. What I'm asking for is clarity on the government's own policy. The government said that they would allow employers to take up to 50% of the money and spend it on things that were not apprenticeships. Now, that either is the policy still, or it is no longer the policy. Which of those two things is the truth?
Minister.
I will get back to you and I'll make sure there is a written response.
Absolutely unreal. Unreal.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. Many opinions say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no.
No.
Division.
Division 12.
Lock the doors.
Pam Cox.
Aye.
Janet Davey.
Aye.
Josh Dean.
Aye.
Lauren Edwards. Aye. Vicky Foxcroft.
Aye.
Anna Geldard.
Aye.
Damien Hines.
No.
Lee Ingram.
Aye.
Neil O'Brien.
No.
Melanie On.
Aye.
Rebecca Paul.
No.
Ian Sollum.
No.
Alan Strickland.
Aye.
Peter Swallow.
Aye.
Lawrence Turner.
Thank you. Ayes 11, noes 4, so the ayes have it. Unlock. The question is that Schedule 1 be the first schedule to the bill. As many opinions say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 be part of the bill. Stand part of the bill.
Formally moved.
Formally?
Formally moved.
As many opinions say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Schedule 2 formally.
Moved formally.
The question is that Schedule 2 be the second schedule to the bill. As many opinions say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 3.
Formally moved.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part of the bill. As many opinions say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Schedule 3.
Formally moved.
The question is that Schedule 3 be the third schedule to the bill. As many opinions say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to amendment number 3, with which it would be convenient also to discuss. Yes?
I'd like to move that the committee do now adjourn.
The question is that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned. As many opinions say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And the committee will meet again at 2 o'clock. Order, order.
Committee Room 12, sound.